Dr. Christopher Carlston and Dr. Karen Bartlett. She graduated from UBC and immediately started working as an industrial hygienist at Suncor Energy in the winter of 2013. And in 2015, she became an occupational hygienist for Dominion Diamond Ekati Corporation and has been there for a little over a year. So thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, everyone. It's really exciting to be here. I was a student like you once, so to be presenting to you about my workplace experience is really humbling and really exciting. So I hope you have lots of questions. I created this presentation really not very detailed, not very in-depth. I'm really looking forward to having an open conversation with you if you have questions about what it's like to work, what it's like to deal with emergency response scenarios. I'm going to leave a lot of room for questions at the end. So to flip, I just use the arrows, right? Regular presentation, great. So basically I have to put this disclaimer up there. I had to vet this through legal and our president to be able to show this today. I can't talk about what caused the fire. I can't talk about my hypotheses as to what actually happened, but I can talk about everything around it, which is what I'm going to do. I'm going to talk about occupational hygiene portion of it, our response, the rationale as to why we chose to respond the way we did. So yeah, if you can refrain from asking me questions about what happened, then we'll be good to go. Hopefully my bosses are not listening right now. So I'm going to go through who we are, what happened, what we did, what we found, how we managed it all, and what the learnings were. I'm pretty junior in my career still. I've probably been doing this for 3 to 4 years, so taking note of the learnings from events like this is really important in terms of not repeating the same mistakes again in the future. So hopefully, if I communicate properly, you'll understand a little bit my train of thought during this whole process. Right, well, who are we? So Ekati, or Dominion Diamond, is a corporation that owns mines in the Northwest Territories. We are 300 kilometers north of Yellowknife. There are no roads to go to where we are. We can only get there by plane or by the winter road when it's cold enough in the winter. There are several different mines located close to us. We have Gachagua, Jericho, Divik, Snap Lake. Snap Lake recently closed its doors, actually, so should update that map. But basically, Ekati is where we work, is where I work, and we have a sister mine, Divik, that's actually quite close to us. So the reason I mentioned Divik is that they'll come into play a little later on in this whole event. We are roughly 2,000 employees at Ekati. At any given time, we're about anywhere from 700 to 900 people on site, and flying in and out at any given time. We have several different mines. We have surface mines, we have underground mines. Right now, we're currently mining from Misery Main, Pigeon, and Koala Underground. We've just started on Sable. We'll be going into Lynx in the spring, and we'll be starting on Jay sometime next year, I believe. Our underground mines actually will probably be developing a little bit more, and then we're going to be putting in another underground mine at Misery at some point, but that's neither here nor there. We're just a mine that processes a lot of ore. Our processing facility, the processing plant, like we like to call it, processes about 4.3 million tons of kimberlite a year. So kimberlite is the name that we give to the ore that we mine that has all the diamonds in it. So in case you hear me say that again, just know that kimberlite means diamonds. So we have several different surface mines and underground mines. We also have, as I mentioned, our processing facility. We have a recovery plant and a sample plant. We also have underground and surface truck shops where we fix the equipment that breaks down so that we don't have to send it out for repair all the time. We're very self-sustaining. We're so remote that we have to be. If something goes down, we have to be able to respond. I don't know how much you guys are aware, but mining is very simple. You grab dirt from the ground, you put it in a pile, you convey that pile, you crush it, you put it in another pile, and then you crush it until the stuff comes out that you really want. It's very simple, so it's not very complex, but it takes up a lot of space. So all the stuff that we have is quite large. Our processing facility is probably 5 stories high. It's probably like maybe like 100 to 200 feet across. Like it's very, very large as a facility. And this is the facility that we had the event at. So very large area. Just to give you an idea, if you were to fly into Ekati today, with the limited amount of daylight hours you have, this is what you would see from the plane. So for those of you who don't know what it's like to work at a remote site, you'll fly in, you'll see this kind of brownish looking building. That's our main accommodations. That's where we sleep, eat, and go to the gym, or some of us go to the gym. Most of us just stay by the ice cream machine. And then in the back over here, to the top left of the picture is our processing facility. So you can see how much bigger it is than the other buildings we have on site. And then to the back right of the picture is our truck shop, or one of our truck shops. So you can see how much bigger and like large our processing facility is. It really needs to separate, crush, convey a lot of ore. So it's got to be pretty big, and we have to have systems in place to be able to keep production if one of our conveyors goes down. So it's a pretty big facility. So essentially, this facility is so big that you have to do shutdowns every so often. So every 3 weeks, the production shuts down and preventative maintenance occurs. So the welders, pipe fitters, millwrights, they'll go into the field and they'll fix whatever they can fix, whatever needs fixing. They'll do some checks to preventative maintenance so that the next shutdown they'll have a better idea of what needs to be fixed. And it's during one of these shutdowns that we had our main event. We had a safe shift meeting in the morning at 6 a.m. We all got into the millwright shop. We talked about how we were going to stay safe that day. We talked about our job hazard analyses. We talked about pre-job checklists. We had a speech from several different higher-ups. And then an hour later, we had an emergency call on the radio calling for Code 1. So Code 1 is a major fire. It prompted immediate evacuation of all personnel in the process plant. So we successfully evacuated 150 people from this area to their primary muster station, and we immediately went into emergency response management. So I haven't been involved in many emergency response scenarios. This one is probably the one that I was involved in with probably from the get-go. Normally in emergency response, from an occupational hygiene perspective, they call you in probably after the fact to say, oh, okay, well, what are the occupational exposure levels now? Can we let people back in? It's very rare that you're involved from the immediate second something happens. And I have to say, this was probably our saving grace, is the fact that we were there to respond the time of the incident. So 2 parts to an emergency response. We have the emergency response team that goes, fights the fire, gets suited up, full bunker gear, and starts putting out the flames. And then we have the incident management team. So emergency response, they went directly to the process plant. They went immediately to fight the fire. And then the incident management team, which is a group of key senior leaders and subject matter experts, such as myself, we met in this tiny little building on the side there, still very close to the fire, but just enough out of the line of fire that we weren't worried about our own personal safety and where we could coordinate what the emergency response team needed. So anything from delaying flights for personnel coming in, getting PPE sent up from Yellowknife or Edmonton, or calling our sister mine Divik to get their emergency response responders to come help us. The fire took 12 hours to extinguish. It was that big of an event that we needed all hands on deck. So we flew through helicopters. We flew the emergency responders from Divik over. They helped us. We cycled them through as best as can to relieve our people. And then one of the key things, and I hope I remember to talk about this at the end. If I don't, please remind me. But one of the key things that was called by the emergency response coordinator was to leave the plant ventilation on. So what that enables is they were able to respond to the fire in a much faster way. There wasn't a lot of accumulation of smoke inside the building. It was expelled outwards. So all our massive HVAC units that normally just recirculate the air were pushing the air out. So all that black dust, you literally would look at the building and it was just spewing black smoke. It was really impressive. But that was one of the key decisions that was made by the coordinator at the time, which ended up saving us later on in terms of damage. So from an occupational hygiene perspective, you're sitting in this room, you're trying to come up with like, okay, the emergency responders are going to be done taking care of this fire at some point. So how are we going to send people back into this environment? Senior leaders are going to want to assess damage. They're going to want samples taken. They're going to want to know, is structural steel damaged? How long is it going to take to fix? Do we need to clean it? Divik had a similar fire probably 5 years ago, and they just sent their people willy-nilly back in. It took them 3 to 5 months to clean it up, and I don't know to this day what damage they did to their workforce because their workforce was not protected. Luckily, because I was in the emergency response incident management team, I was able to say, well, we need to allow our people back in, but under controlled circumstances. So we had the ERT go out with our Mini Ray 3000 that monitored for VOCs, our TSI dust track, that monitored for respirable dust, and our MX6, which is just carbon monoxide, nitrogen dioxide, oxygen levels, and LELs. With those, we were able to determine that the acute hazards were out of the way and that we could allow people back in under certain levels of protection. So we still allowed them back in, and I'll explain with what level right after. But we really had limited equipment on site that could let us know in that precise moment what contaminants we were dealing with. So it really was general survey meters we had to rely on. We didn't really know what occupational exposure limits to look at. All we knew is, for the short-term exposure limits, we weren't exceeding any of them, so that was something. So to be able to allow people back in, as a junior hygienist, you don't necessarily know you definitely don't know everything. You don't know what you don't know, and the stuff that you do know, you're kind of like, well, am I confident enough in my knowledge to say, okay, you can or cannot wear a respirator going back in there? So what we ended up doing was just going full hazmat gear back in. We had full face respirators with P100 and multi-gas cartridges. We had disposable coveralls, mandatory, taped to the cuffs and the boots, just in case there was acidic gas in the air that would, cause irritation to the skin. We weren't sure yet. At this point in time, you have no idea what this place even looks like. The only people that have seen it are the ERT, and ERT, they're not occupational hygienists. They don't know what to tell you. They're just like, it's black and it's gross and everything's falling apart. And so we also had to set up a mini decontamination center. So you're sending people into a zone. You don't know if there's radiation. You don't know if your nuclear gauges are tempered with. You don't know, if this stuff is, going to eat through their suits. You have to send people in with as much protection as you possibly can, at least from my perspective. Another thing that was really interesting is you could put people in full face in this environment, but they got to be fit tested. So you have 40 to 60 people looking to get back in there to do their assessments, and you have to sit down and you only have one fit test machine to go through all these people. So that was very challenging in and of itself because it's such a high intense situation, and here you have something that takes so long to do. It's only 10 minutes, but 10 minutes is a lifetime when you have an emergency on your hands. So we set up a mini decontamination center. This was quite funky. So the process plant, you have to remember there's diamonds in here. So it's a very locked down facility. You have to swipe in, swipe out. Not anyone can just go in. You have to have proper access. And so you need some sort of way of controlling who's going in and keeping track of who's going in because your insurance adjusters are going to want to know, legal's going to want to know. And so you have to have a one entry, one exit point to be able to control all these people going in and out. And so we set up, right by the millwright shop, we set up a clean room and a dirty room. The clean room, we just put all the PPE we could muster, we put it in there. We had it set up for the guys to set up so that we could coach them on how to decontaminate on the way out. And then they would have to mandatory sign into this logbook that was right at the entrance and then go through the dirty room into the process plant. Like a very untrained workforce that's never had to protect their skin from any type of contaminant is now being asked to wear disposable coveralls, to tape up their cuffs, to wear full face respirators. I mean, it was really interesting in terms of a communication challenge. We had some people who, didn't really even speak English, and here they are being asked to go in and assess the damage, and you're just trying to get them not to get too dirty. So it was challenging, but it was great. We had a set of dedicated people that would stay there, that would coach people going in and out, making sure they had the appropriate protection on. And then when they would come out, they would decontaminate properly. They had an orientation to the environment to make sure that they knew what they were getting themselves into. Some of our guys even got really into it. Here's one of our electricians actually calling himself a Ghostbuster. And they developed a lot of tips and tricks throughout themselves. Like with their hard hats on, it would get really, really sweaty, so they would put booties on their hats or on their heads to absorb the sweat. So, amidst this crazy time, there's still, really good people that were working there and trying to make the best out of a really crappy situation. Um, so amidst all this, putting a mini decontamination center up, developing decontamination protocols, trying to decide long-term what this was going to do, we got our results back for bulk samples and air samples. So we ended up taking 4 Tedler bag air samples to see what the VOC levels were inside the plant, making sure that the ventilation was dissipating any contaminant left behind. And then we want to take soot samples to see, okay, what are we dealing with? Are we in danger of acute or long-term? What's going on? What we found was absolutely no acute short-term effects could have been had with the exposures. They were mostly long-term chronic. I'll explain a little bit more how we came to that conclusion in the next slide, but basically what the results showed us is you can get exposed, you can get health effects by breathing it in, getting it through your skin, and even ingesting it. We're talking about a workforce that takes pride in having their hands dirty, takes pride in coming out a day's work being covered in head to toe in dirt because they worked really hard. So this is a group that does not wear disposable coveralls. This is a group that does not wash their coveralls because it's cool to have dirty coveralls, right? So you can imagine the challenge we were looking forward to in terms of communicating the fact that they had to wash quite heavily after being exposed to this stuff. Also, we didn't know how long this was going to take. We didn't know how long we were going to be there. Is it going to take 3 months to clean? Is it going to take a year? Are we just going to leave it as is and let them go willy-nilly? Like what? We didn't really know at that point in time the exposure length and the frequency at which they were going to get exposed. So most of you probably have a basis of toxicology and could probably do this research on your own, but essentially you get a result back from the lab and you just look at, okay, what's the toxicology, what we're dealing with, what concentrations, and what's the reasonable exposure that we could assume that we're gonna see here. So there's 2 types of soot in the process plant. Really close to the fire, what was really interesting is it was very thick, very oily, very sticky. You couldn't just wipe your hand on it, it wasn't gonna come off. You really had to scrub and actually chip at the oily residue that was left behind. And then there was all the rest, the dry soot, the stuff that you would, take in your hands, you'd actually sprinkle and it would stay in the air and just float around. Very dry, very fine, it's probably, lots of ultrafines, lots of respirable dust there. The pH was pretty basic, nothing to worry about there, but the contents of the metal content and the VOC content was worrisome, particularly metals. To have a metal that withstands the cold that we deal with up north, it has to have a lot of manganese in it. It makes it more durable, it lasts for longer in the cold, so all that burnt into the air and all that went into the soot. And so you don't want manganese exposure in your workforce, particularly long-term, nor do you want lead, and both of those are readily absorbed through the ingestion pathways and the inhalation pathways. So we really had to control those 2 routes of exposure. So we understood that was going to happen, that we had a workforce that was very dynamic, that wasn't very well trained in terms of decontamination, so we had to set up a more permanent decontamination station. The millwrights were going to need their shop at some point. They're going to have to start building back the stuff that we burnt, and so we had to get out of there. So I'm sitting there in an incident management room, and I'm like, okay, I need to come up with a long-term solution. So jotted something on the whiteboard. It kind of looked like this scribbly mess of crap. And I understood this, but try to communicate that to your construction group on site, and they're just like, I don't even know what you're saying, Bianca. Like this looks like gibberish. So I said, I need a lot of space. There's going to be 40 to 100 people going in and out of this place a day. A little bit less overnight shift, but there's going to be a lot of workforce. There's the cleaners, there's the construction, there's whatever maintenance needed to be done had to still be done. And so you have to think, you can't eat or drink in there. It's contaminated. The guys can't take their coveralls off and go to the washroom. They can't. They have to come out, decontaminate. They have to wash. Some people won't be able to wear disposable coveralls because it's a fire hazard, so they have to have another means of washing themselves. Having sinks available, having showers available in case someone becomes grossly contaminated, falls into an area where all there is accumulated soot. You have to think this plant has tons of nooks and crannies. We're not going to clean it. It's not going to be spotless, so you have to, worry about these things. And so we decided to create each component you see here basically was a 20-foot sea can that we stuck side by side. So there's about 4 sea cans here, and then there's a wash cart tied to it, and we put a roof over everything so that you could reach every single section of this area without having to go outside in case of rain, snow, Again, we didn't know how long we were going to be there. We had to get water piped in, we had to get a sump piped in, we had to get electrical done. But to have it go from this crazy drawing on a whiteboard to actually made within a week was phenomenal. I can't even explain how amazing it was to see that happen. And to get a call from site services being like, okay, we're almost done your decon station, come check it out, and say, I want cubbies here, I want electrical panels here, I want, poly sheeting between these sections. They need to be, separated because you're going to have people walking all over the place. I had never seen that before, and that's what I'm pretty much really happy about, how well that turned out. And so I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about the Decontamination Center because it ended up being my baby through this whole thing. This is where we communicated with workers. This is where we, gave them orientation. If they weren't getting the right information from their leaders or their supervisors, this is where we had hands-on coaching, hands-on face-to-face communication. A lot of the employees were super worried. They're going into a place, they have to suit up. They're like, what is this, like asbestos? Like, am I worried? Am I going to die? So you have to calm them down. You have to explain it's a long-term hazard. It's just if you keep exposing yourself day in, day out, and you do not decontaminate properly, that's going to be a problem later on. So they would come into the first trailer, and this is what they would see. They would see our tool crib attendant, our decontamination center attendant. So this was Kate, one of our health and wellness coordinators, who was reappropriated for this specific task. They'd put their regular PPE up on hooks, and then they'd start suiting up. We had signs everywhere. We had flow charts on how to decontaminate properly. You have to think as well, there was different work happening at the time. So there was general labor, there was hot work, there was scaffolding happening, and all these work areas are right next to each other. So you had to have a good understanding of how to protect the workers in the work area that you were to make sure that they wouldn't come into contact with the contamination zone that you were creating. So we had to coach them there as well. We had to make sure we had a sign in, sign out legally, and for process plant requirements, we had to keep track, we had to have a log. We had a lockout tagout station, so with all the maintenance work happening, nothing can be energized. Even if you turn off the main switch, you really have to still do your lockout tagout in case something gets re-energized during the process, and then you really don't want to hurt your employees. So lockout tagout station was there. We had dedicated areas, dedicated CCANs to our PPE. So I'm really surprised to this day that they got $30,000 to be able to pay for like PAPRs, but they paid for PAPRs to charge them so that people could go in. Not everybody was clean shaven. Trying to get guys to shave before they go to work is extremely difficult, especially in the mining sector. It's probably one of my biggest challenges on a day-to-day basis. So we needed to have PAPRs to be able to account for those individuals. We don't have time to fight battles like that when they have to do work and it's emergency. So the company bought PAPRs. We had disposable coveralls. We had to have Gatorade and water available. I mean, you don't realize this at the time, but Yellowknife, even north of Yellowknife, it was 30 degrees plus some days. And you have scaffolders working at heights. It's even warmer. The sun's blazing and they're trying to work. They're sweating their asses off because they have 3 layers of disposable coveralls on. At one point, you have to rehydrate them. You have to be aware of heat stress. You have to make sure they're taking the appropriate breaks. So all our health and safety programs were just, right at the forefront. If they had questions about why they have an occupational hygiene team, they were answered during those 3 months. What was really interesting too is we had to have an air conditioner for this trailer or for this decontamination center, and that was then switched into a heater. That's how fast the temperature changed throughout those 3 months. Is we had to have cooling during the summer when it was plus 30, but then we had to have heating in the fall because it was like 0 degrees outside. Our dirty side was led directly into the plant. That was the only entry and exit allowed at the time into the plant. So very dirty on the outside of that. We had a boot washing station so that the guys could get their boots clean before they came in. And then they would clean the gross contaminant off with baby wipes before they stepped into the less dirty room. They would take their disposable coveralls off, put them in the double-bagged containers, and then come out of there into this less dirty side, and that's where they would clean their hard hat, they'd clean their respirator, they'd clean any exposed skin that they had in the plant. If they needed to, there was showers right in the back, that we had towels and anything they needed to clean themselves with. So we really had a really well-oiled machine that, whatever the workers needed, we had it there. So, I mean, it was a great experience overall to see a relatively untrained workforce go from not knowing how to decontaminate to telling each other, being their own buddies. If a new employee came to site, they were the ones taking them under their wings and saying, oh, wait, buddy, you need to wear this for this job, or you need to watch out because that's a fire hazard. You can't wear disposable coveralls for this job. It was really, really nice to see that they actually took ownership of their own health and safety. So from an occupational hygiene, what we ended up doing is we ended up having our hands pretty much in a lot of different places. So we developed occupational hygiene response procedures for when we have emergencies like that. We developed decontamination and cleanup procedures. I mean, they wanted to take their personal items out of the process plant, but a lot of that was porous. We didn't know if it was contaminated or not. We had fall protection that was porous, so we didn't know if it was compromised or not. You have to recertify everything. We had to audit and review the fact that we request them to wear this PPE, but are they wearing it in the field? So send our hygiene advisor out to the field, make sure that they're auditing, make sure that they're coaching in the field. Do air and surface clearance. So we're paying all this money for our workforce to go into the process plant and clean up and clean this stuff up, but is it working? So you had to do air clearance testing, surface testing, making sure that none of the residual was left behind to make sure that the area was clean so that you could restart the plant so that things could get back to normal. As I mentioned, really great positives was being involved from minute one. Divik, again, had a similar fire 5 years ago. They didn't have a hygiene team there at the time, and they just let their people go back in willy-nilly. And so to this day, we don't really know what impact that had on them, but if they walked into our plant without respiratory protection, I can guarantee that they had some significant exposures to that soot and that contaminant. So being involved from minute one was great. Having my managers, having my back and saying whatever she says goes was amazing. If he hadn't have said that, guaranteed the occupational hygiene program would have been bulldozed over and they would have just gone in there without any protection. So the fact that I had a manager, a health and safety manager, that really believed in what the hygiene team brought to the table was really fantastic. The awareness we got for all our hygiene programs, normally they see you, they call you the dust lady, she comes with her buzz boxes, she's really annoying because she's always asking us for stuff, but they actually saw the value that we brought to the team, how we protected them, what we protected them from. It was really an in-your-face, eye-opening experience for a lot of these employees that normally just saw us as a nuisance. So those are the positives. Challenges. For me personally, the challenges was repetition. Repetition. Just because you said it to one person does not mean everyone else knows. So you're saying the same thing to all the leaders, every different level of leadership, to the employees. You're repeating day in, day out. You're saying, and they keep pushing because they want to get back in there. They want their plant to run. They need their money. This is our money maker. If there are no diamonds coming out of this, we are not making money. And we are a no-debt company, so we went in debt because of this. But we pushed through and we got through it. But every day you had to stand your ground. Can we go back in yet? Do we need Tyvek coveralls? Do we need respiratory protection? Yes, yes, yes. Until we send the massive email and the massive communication, everyone, you must wear this PPE. I know a lot of you probably read the studies that come out of UBC or that go in the Journal of Occupational and Environmental Hygiene. Lots of information about firefighter exposures, particularly to their gear post-fire. One thing that I'm still working on with our emergency response team is decontaminating their gear after the fire. It's not something that was done before, it was never thought of, and so you have all these VOCs, these PAHs, the soot that's off-gassing that they're continuously being exposed to, and so that created a whole other workload for us to do, is to try to get those suits decontaminated properly. Enforcing PPE, so that was great. Everyone at site is now fit tested. We are 100% compliance in our respiratory protection program. Yay. Heat stress management. Heat stress management was a big one during the June and July months of this work because, like I mentioned earlier, we had scaffolders, we had hot work, we had welders. You can't ask a welder to wear disposable coveralls, so they're just going to have to shower after they do their full day work, and you have to make sure that they shower. You know, I don't like going to a 40-year-old man saying, "Did you shower today?" That's not something that was in my job description. But it was fun. It was great. You really got to know people on a personal level. One of the major things that I loved about this was hazard communication. I remember being in a meeting, and I just didn't understand why this guy didn't understand what I was trying to say. He was like, "Yeah, but we're not protected, we're exposed." I'm like, "You're fine. Like, I told you, I have all the information here. Like, why aren't you understanding?" And later, one of my colleagues was like, "That's not what he was trying to say. He was worried. He was scared. He wanted you to acknowledge his frustration, his fear." And so that whole aspect of personality communication, and in an emergency like this, it's not about knowledge. It's not about your brain. It's not about how much you can spew about the toxicology of lead. It's about, do you understand what they're worried about? Do you hear them? And are you doing what you can to help them? So hazard and risk communication was a huge learning for me. And then the changing work front. I mean, it changed minute to minute. You could go in the process plant in the morning, in the afternoon, something completely different was going on. We had electrical, we had millwrights, we had you know, the operations, the surface mining operations team going in there, cleaning as much as they possibly could. It was an ever-changing work environment. And that was really interesting, actually, to see what work impacted exposures the most. I mean, we learned so much as an occupational hygiene team during those 3 months. So obviously, hindsight is 2020. I did have this book in my library. I didn't know I had this book in my library, so I wasn't using it as best as I could during this situation. But if you're going to work for a company one day and you don't have a lot of budget, I highly recommend getting a strategy for assessing and managing occupational exposures. There's a whole section about emergency response. There's a whole section about what guidelines to use, who to go to, what to look at, how to assess the protection of workers. It's a really great resource. I also used a lot of the risk assessment documentation by the EPA and a lot of the universities in the US. And then obviously the ACGI HTLVs really helped me throughout this process as well. So yeah, so before I take questions, I just wanted to show you, I don't know if many of you have had a chance to go to the Northwest Territories or see what the tundra looks like, but right now I got back to Vancouver on Tuesday and it was about -20, felt like -32, which kind of looks like this. It's kind of like a winter wonderland. It's very flat. There's tons of puddles everywhere. They call it the land of a million puddles because that's what it is. It's just water everywhere. And you can't walk on this, by the way. It's all rocks. So if you're trying to walk on the tundra, good luck. You'll probably break your ankle. It's tons of holes. You really can't go unless they build you an ice road. But during the summer, it looks beautiful. So in June and July, when this was all happening, this is what it looked like. You had, you know, blue skies. It was plus 30 degrees. The water was crystal clear. And it was just absolutely gorgeous. So that's where I work. That's where the event happened. That's my learnings from an occupational hygienist point of view, from a pretty junior person. But it was great, and I'm really happy to have shared with you today. So hopefully you have some questions. So.
Thanks, Bianca, for the interesting talk. Questions?
Head.
Congratulations on doing an excellent job up there.
Thanks. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I guess a couple of questions. So was it all the conveyors and the electrical insulation, that sort of thing, that burned out of the plant, or do you know?
So luckily, none of our conveyors were directly impacted. Some of the structural steel holding the conveyors was, and the stuff that burnt was pretty much all around the equipment that burnt. So we did have some electrical panels. We had cable trays. We had, you know, some of the plastics we had in the area burnt off quite well. So I can't really say exactly what burnt, but those are the
Those
materials.
are the sorts of materials that went out. Yeah, right, okay.
Totally.
And do you have an estimate of how long it's going to take to get the plant running again? Or?
We are back and running, sir.
You are?
Yes.
Congratulations.
So, yeah, very exciting. Sorry, not to mention, this happened on June 23rd, and we were back up and running in September. So we pushed hard, and we did it safely, and we got it back up and running. So, yeah.
Congratulations to the whole team.
Thank you very much, Ed.
Sorry, I'm going to steal this. Was there concerns about asbestos being released during the incident? And have you managed your asbestos inventory before and after the fire?
Luckily, we were built in we were built in 98, 97 or 98, so asbestos really wasn't an issue for us. There is some literature that shows that kimberlite ore in South Africa is associated with asbestos fibers and asbestos form, deposits, but we don't have the similar type of deposit at Ekati, so we really weren't worried about asbestos. But that's a good point. We did have an inventory of all the air clearance and the surface sampling that we did. We are keeping now an inventory for future years. If anyone comes back, with questions or was this place clean or not, we do have now an inventory for that. So, good question.
Hi, thanks for the very informative talk. So in our program, we got to hear a lot of talks from people who work in the industry, and usually when we hear from them, it's a very distinct cut between hygienists and people who work in safety. And so I was really pleasantly surprised to hear that you work almost in both, practically. Because I thought it would make sense to combine the two. You have the person who knows the hazards and then person to implement the programs and safety programs, because they know what the hazards are. But for some reason, it's very distinct, and people work in those two separate sectors separately. So I'm just wondering, is it common in maybe the diamond mining industry that industrial hygienists work in both hygiene and safety, or is it still kind of separate?
Oh, that's a great question. I think if you would have asked the hygienist there before, probably 5 years ago, it was a lot more, the department was a lot more one in the way that they acted. It was health, safety. It wasn't safety and occupational hygiene. Unfortunately, occupational hygiene wasn't given a lot of attention when it was kind of a one-size-fits-all department, and they did separate it, and it really is now very separate, what occupational hygiene does and what safety does. But in an event like this, I guess those department lines really blur, and everyone ends up doing everything, right? And you have to understand the safety aspects of it if you're going to implement the hygiene aspects of it, because they can't not talk to each other. They're so intertwined, it's crazy. So I'd say, unfortunately, we are very separated. It's kind of the way the industry is. If you are one group and you're all generalists, tend to take more of the safety aspects, and that's given more priority than occupational hygiene. I know for our group at site, we used to have generalists, and the occupational hygiene programs never really made it through. They were just kind of like an afterthought. And so they decided to get an occupational hygienist, get hygiene advisors, and really just make them focus on occupational hygiene so that the programs could get the attention they deserved. So I'd say, unfortunately, we are very separated still. I think smaller companies will go for generalists more so. The bigger companies will try to separate as much as possible. So it really depends on, I guess, where you end up working and what you end up seeing. But I'm like you. I like the idea of both of them being, side by side, more so now than I did before, just seeing what this event brought into our lives. And it pays to know both. I mean, if you talk to a senior hygienist out there, I doubt there's any senior hygienist who doesn't know a lot about safety as well. It's just part of the industry. It's part of what you know, and it's part of what helps you do your job better.
Bianca, so great to see you.
Nice to see you as well.
And thanks so much for sharing these field stories with us. You're plunked right into a major incident, and so proud of how you handled it. My memory serves me right. You worked for a large oil and gas industry in northern Alberta. Yes. I think before the Fort McMurray fire.
Yes.
Yeah. Yep.
So
my question is, you dealt with this fire that was obviously unanticipated. Your experience in another heavy resource industry, with the risk of that being, constantly there, I don't think you had encountered an incident like that in that workplace. But did you have, did you feel that you had it in your toolkit to bring to this different sector, which is mining, and be quite well prepared to deal with the sort of things that came your way?
That's interesting. That's a great question, actually. You learn a lot of theory. You learn a lot you read a lot, and you think, all right, I can put this in practice. And if it wasn't for the couple of emergency scenarios I had been involved in my previous workplace, I don't think I would have felt as prepared to deal with this situation at the mining company that I was if I had just come out of school. I think I would have been a little bit kind of a little bit out of sorts. I won't say I was lucky, because you never want to be part of an emergency, but I was involved in emergencies at this other workplace I was working at, and it really helped me understand the logistics behind it, how to be prepared, what to have in place, and I think I brought a lot of that experience to the company, the mining company, Dominion Diamond, and then it was nice to see that theory that you learn about and then the resources that you have access to actually being implemented from a program-based, not just a reactive in the field like I was before, but more of a program plan fashion. So it was a bit of both, sort of prepared, but yet not really.
Sorry, just an additional question about organization culture. Any difference between who you're working for now versus previous?
Huge. Wow, that's a question I could talk about forever. So to give you guys a bit of background, the company I worked for before was employs about 30,000 Canadians. We lived in Fort McMurray. There's about 15,000 employees on site on a daily basis. Huge excellent operational discipline culture, lots of safety initiatives, lots of, safety is a number one over there. You could talk to anyone, everyone knew the procedures. It was like if I had something to say or recommend they wear PPE, they'd be like, yep, on it. If I said double hearing protection, double hearing protection. My experience at the mining industry is 180. Absolute 180. I remember talking to Karen when I first started this position, how challenging it was, because you're walking into a workforce, they don't need you. They don't want you there, and you're coming and you're saying, well, you're being exposed to this, and you need to protect yourself, and you can't just say, you have to wear this. They're like, no. They literally will just look at you and say no. So you have to build a case. You have to communicate to leadership. You have to communicate to the work employees. It's not necessarily safety first. It's actually production first. So you have to build that in their culture by influence, by managing up, if you will, or coaching upwards. It's very, very challenging. And you're looking at a huge workforce to a medium-sized company where personally the people that you work with, and you have a vested interest in their health and safety because you know the name of their kids. And you're like, well, how would you feel if Sarah had kids and you couldn't hear them anymore? You're already dealing with hearing loss. What are you going to do to fix this? You have to try to hit them home, and a very different experience for me, but both very enriching, both very unforgettable experiences, but I find the level of coaching and the level of engagement is a lot higher in this smaller company than I had before, which is great in itself. That's a great question, Lydia. Yes.
Wondering, have you noticed an increased use of respirators and such post-fire compared to before the fire?
It's a great question, Ed. I think with the younger workforce, 100%. The younger workforce is very keen to their health and safety. This is the group that works out. This is the group that eats quinoa because they know what it is. And so the older generation, unfortunately, it's very much like I've been exposed to this for 40 years. It's not going to change now, and they're back to their old ways, which it takes a level of coaching in and of itself. Working on that, but I'm seeing a lot more compliance with the younger guys, and I really like that because our mind is moving towards, not promoting those guys, but at least giving them that attention and saying, hey, these guys are wearing it, you guys should be wearing it too. So it's kind of like this, hopefully, more positive bubble we're creating rather than saying, oh, look at that guy, he's wearing a respirator, how stupid does he look? Which it was before, but no, we're moving towards something better.
I was having the same experiences 40 years ago.
Yeah. Sort of sad to hear it's not changed.
I suspect the mining industry lags, well, like you say, it lagged the oil industry big time.
Huge.
in terms of the attitudes and the way people think and do things. So, yeah, but obviously you had a great opportunity. You gained some real ground in that 3 months of an emergency situation. And undoubtedly, that will help in your location anyway to make a change in how people do things. So that's great.
Yeah, totally. Well said. Hopefully, we can keep that momentum going, right? So.
Okay, I have a few online questions here. First, what standards did you use for acceptable surface sampling of contamination?
Great question. So one thing I forgot to mention in this presentation is this was all happening when the Fort McMurray fires were happening. So crazy the amount of samples that were going to the labs in Canada. So we had to find a lab that was willing to take them and do surface carbonation testing. So the limits we ended up taking weren't actual lead clearance or manganese clearance, they were surface carbonation. So if we could get lower than 1% contamination on surface carbonation, so the presence of burnt materials on our surfaces, we were happy. That was our criteria, that's what we chose, that's what they were using in Fort McMurray at the time. And then we, for air clearance, we did 12-hour exposure limits to metals. If they were below 12-hour exposure limits to certain metals, we were okay. The only time we saw high exposures was when they were actively generating dust clouds. So during sandblasting activities, during welding, grinding, and then certain types of cleanup. So if they were cleaning up highly contaminated areas, we tried to get them to do like wet sweeping, but not dry sweeping. But we'd still see high levels of dust and metals during those activities because the soot was so dry and so volatile, or got airborne so well.
Okay, how close is the nearest community, and were you concerned at all about community exposures to the smoke?
That's a great question. You know what? I'm not sure what the nearest community is. I know they. Oh, I think like. I couldn't. You know what? I wouldn't want to say something wrong, so I'm not really sure which community. We were very much worried about the environmental exposures, so we worked quite closely with the environment group, particularly in preventing contamination of the watershed. But we were not worried about neighboring communities. We were mostly worried about our impact on our immediate environment. But yeah, no, that's a great question. Unfortunately, not familiar with. Okay.
Hey, just the implications of leaving the ventilation on.
Oh yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for that. Okay, so we talked about at first they left the HVAC system on to be able to clear the air of smoke so that the emergency responders could actually see what they were doing. What that ended up doing is instead of the smoke staying indoors and settling on all our equipment, it actually pushed a lot of it out. So the level of contamination that we had, we could have spent 6 months cleaning it, we actually only spent 3 because of that decision. They ended up saving us so much money moving forward and time just by leaving those on. Now, we had to clean the HVAC units afterwards because they were contaminated and we didn't want to recontaminate the whole work zones when they were clean, which was costly in and of itself, but essentially it ended up saving us a lot of time and being absolutely fantastic for us. So. How do you say that? Wetquity? Is the closest community. My friend Arden, who actually worked with me at site when this all happened. Arden's was essential in getting me the PPE that I needed as soon as I possibly could. So Wetquity? Okay, that's the closest community, just to respond to that question. Pierce.
So to talk about the ventilation, you said they were left the fans on. Did they open the doors at all? We had an issue before the fire with dust issues.
Yep. So in order to prevent anyone from going in and out of these areas, everything was locked down. So all the doors were closed, except for that CGT laydown area where they needed to bring big equipment in. Everything else was locked down and closed. And so when the fans were going on during the shutdown day, everything was closed except for that overhead door by door 7, I believe it was. Just so you guys know, Pierce and I worked together. Pierce worked in the process plant as well, and luckily he wasn't around when this happened, but he knows exactly what I'm talking about when I say, we left the ventilation on and what that impact would have had on the process plant itself. So thanks for coming, Pierce. Does that answer your question? Okay.
Just a question back here.
Yep.
Just going off of leaving the ventilation on, it looked like all of your, like that whole room setup you set for decontamination and stuff like that, that was on the wall heading outside. Leaving the ventilation on, blowing all that soot outside, did you have to do any cleanup outside of the actual building because all of that stuff would have been settling around and stuff like that and could potentially be contaminated on the other side of your clean room, right?
That's a great question. That's a wonderful question, actually. It's one of our first questions that we asked ourselves before reoccupying a lot of these spaces. are they clean? If the HVAC was blowing out, was another air handling unit sucking it right back into non-contaminated zones? So for those, we had to pull in the HVAC specialists to let us know, okay, where was the wind going, where was the dust going, or the soot actually, and are we safe? Did it come back into the building a certain way? So we were able to confirm with them that the soot was pushing outwards away from other air handling units, and then when we went in for our inspection, obviously we went into full hazmat. We did some surface samples, we cleared those before re-entry into those spaces. And then, yeah, we had to clean outside. We didn't clean the ground outside, we had to clean all the walls because environmentally, we're not allowed to put anything into the water, anything on the ground unless we have to pick it up. So we had a lot of dioxins that are natural accumulators in the environment that we had to pick up. We had to scrub the walls. That was a very challenging experience for our plant ops and our environment team. They literally had to tarp all around the process plant and spray wash and pressure wash that dust off the walls and collect that water and put that water through our sumps, and that we would then recycle in our water in one of our tailings ponds. And then the tailings ponds was actively monitored to make sure that the water wasn't exceeding any limits. But that was a very challenging part of all this, was the environmental component of fire and contamination and metals and dioxins and PAHs and VOCs going into the environment. It's a great question. I love these questions. Yay!
Right. So was part of the cleanup done with the HVAC systems off? Or,
Yes.
okay.
Yep. So essentially what ended up happening is they left it on, and then after the first 12 to 16 hours when the ERT cleared the process plant for reentry, everything was locked down. So HVAC was locked down, all the major pieces of equipment were locked down, and the HVAC units were not turned on until they were deemed clear by our surface and air sampling.
Okay, so yeah, did they require cleaning, or did you just?
Yeah.
Okay, so you
Major
checked
cleaning.
them, cleaned them, got them clean, and
Yeah.
then turned the whole thing back on again.
And go figure, Ed, they'd never cleaned their HVAC systems before, so you wouldn't believe what the things we found in there.
Shocking.
Nah. We found dust bunnies, we found piles of I won't say silica, but we found piles of dirt and dust, and it was just like, oh, okay. Hasn't been done in 18 years, so it's like we're starting fresh. It's like we gave the whole plant a facelift. It was great.
So, have you asked some of your sister mines when they last looked inside their HVAC units?
No, but I should probably ask our sister mine Divec, actually. They would probably be facing the same thing we are.
It'd be a really good question to ask.
Yes.
Thanks.
Thanks, Ed. Yep.
Any other questions?
Sorry, again with leaving the ventilation on, do you know if the damage caused by the fire was increased by leaving the ventilation on because you'd be effectively oxygenating the fire
Yep.
and, like a blacksmith just pumping onto it and yeah, do you know if that had an
That's
effect
a
on the damage or whatever?
Great question. I have to trust our emergency response coordinators. I mean, they have years and years experience in this stuff, so perhaps it did, perhaps it didn't. I couldn't even answer that. I think in the end, I think they were able, I can't say, but it's a great question. So yeah, it could have fueled it. It could have, but essentially helped the firefighters actually quench it because they could see what they were doing. So the benefit of them seeing versus the negativity of having that air cycling through, wouldn't even be able to say. But that's a great question. More questions?
Thanks. It was a really good presentation. I was just wondering, how big was the team, and what were the challenges in just getting all the PPE and even just supplying Gatorade in the Northwest Territories, where just getting
Pardon?
materials up there is already very difficult.
That's a great question. It was extremely challenging. So the health and safety team, we had one safety advisor, we had one health and wellness coordinator, we had one hygiene advisor, and then those were the people in the field every day. There was myself, team leaders, and a manager to respond to any questions from leadership or to give presentations. And then we relied heavily on our purchasing logistics department to help us out. I mean, there were no dust masks left in Canada. No dust masks left in Canada. Go figure. We had to get them from the States. We had to code 99 them, which is like this really fancy talk for get them up here as fast as possible. That's why we got a lot of the powered air purifying respirator units, because we couldn't get respiratory protection, fast enough for the rate at which we were consuming them. We got 2 boxes of disposable coveralls to start with. We went through thousands a day. Like, it was very challenging to get everything up there. They actually flew planes up just for PPE. They chartered flights. They got people in Yellowknife to buy us baby wipes at the Walmart. That was Arden. Arden literally went to Walmart and got us baby wipes because we had nothing to wipe our guys down or their skin. I mean, you can give them as much paper towel as they want, but then they're going to start getting rashes, and you don't want, dirt and grime going into poor guys' rashes. So, you get them baby wipes. It makes everybody happier at the end of the day. Does that answer a little bit of your question? We were a very small team to deal with a very large issue, but because it was all hands on deck, I think departments made allowances and everybody helped each other out. So normally this whole game that workplaces play, like, oh, that's not my job, I'm not going to do that for you, out the window. Everyone, all hands on deck, we're all helping each other out. People that, had regular purchasing PO jobs were now pulled into, you are full-time process plant fire dedicated, you are seconded for 3 to 6 months, we need you, come help. Yes.
Hi, that was a really great talk, very interesting. Quick question also more about what your role was in this. So with the decisions that had to be made of how to handle the decontamination, all the hazard exposures, how much of these decisions were like your decisions to make, or did you have people to bounce ideas off of, or were you in like a very large leading role during this?
Yes, that was really tough. That was like in the moment, everyone's health and safety is on you, and you have to decide. So the reason we went with such a protective, I'm very confident in my decision making to go above and beyond the protection required, because I am so junior and I don't want to be responsible for leading people down that path of overexposure or long-term chronic health effects. So those initial decisions fell on my shoulders, but rest assured, I called everyone I knew. I called hygienists that I knew that were available, that worked in the oil and gas industry, that were dealing with the fires on a day-to-day basis. I called my mentors to ask them questions like, what should I do? Who should I go to? What company should I use for this? The hygienists that I met at conferences, a lot of them, have a lot of emergency response experience. So those conferences you go to, those cards you keep, sometimes they actually come in handy. So I got a lot of positive feedback for the decisions that I made. It's something that I was looking forward to getting outsider experience and knowledge on, because when you're alone, and yes, you can bounce ideas off of, but you're really the only hygienist there who has any kind of training in hygiene. You can ask your manager, but your manager was a fire chief for 20 years. He doesn't know, So a lot of the decision-making processes fell on me, which is why when there was a lot of pushback, there was a lot of frustration from the field, it was really important to keep yourself separated, to make sure that your decision, at the end of the day, you could sleep with, even though it seemed overprotective, even though people were really frustrated with the level of protection that there was. I think at the end of the day, it was the right choice to make at the time. But again, lots of learnings for me moving forward in terms of emergency response, that's for sure.
Okay. And that is time. Please join me in thanking Bianca.
Thanks.